تو ایمانا حسین جانا ترا دارا لہو بہتا ہے بہنے دو کہ جا جاتی ہے جانے دو چراغ ظلم گر ظالم جلاتا ہے جلانے دو بجھائیں گے لہو سے حسین جانا ترا دارا نغافے کثرت دشمن نبی میں بے کسی درد حمیدانام کے لطف تو درہ والا بود شامل بعشق نازانم حسین جانا ترا دارا قسم عباس و اکبر کی قسم زینب کی چادر کی نہیں ممکن کہ رک جائے عزاداری یہ سرور کی نہ رک پائے گئے ماتم حسین جانا ترا دارا شہادت آرزوئے دل شہادت افتخار من بنزد حضرت زہرا ہمیں نزد اعتبار من منو ان عشق چشمانہ حسین جانا ترا دارا شہیدوں کی جو مائیں ہیں فرشتوں کا سلام ان پر جواب آئی کی میت سے جو بہنیں لپٹی رو کر یہی کہتی رہی ہر دم حسین جانا ترا دارا جفا کے اس تسلسل کی نہ کوئی آخری حد ہے، اب ایسے میں سہارا بس विलाए आले अहमद है, वसीला है।
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، ولا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين وحجته في العالمين، واللعن الدائم على أعدائهم وغاصبي حقوقهم وجاحدي مناقبهم ومنكري فضائلهم من الآن إلى أبد الآبدين. فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم لهم شركاء شرعوا لهم من الدين ما لم يأذن به الله ولولا كلمة الفصل لقضي بينهم وإن الظالمين لهم عذاب أليم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم الشريف. My dear viewers, I extend my love, my respect, and my greetings of peace to you. May Allah bless you all. May Allah keep you well. May Allah give you and me the capacity to follow Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam, and to be truthful to their cause, and to be loyal to their obedience, and to be faithful to them in our faith. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajjil farajahum al-sharif. Our discussion on the topic of Taqlid continues. Taqlid has been tried by mujtahideen to be substantiated by another set of ahadith in which there is the mention of fatwa. The dilemma that the mujtahideen and jurists have with regard to the institution of taqlid is that they do not have any ahadith which clearly dictate the Shia and which clearly make it an obligation of the Shia to practice taqlid in their daily lives. There is only one such hadith that gives that impression that it perhaps is talking about the legitimacy of taqlid in a direct manner, and that is the hadith of Al-Imam Al-Hasan Al-Askari alayhi salam, which we discussed. The rest of the hadith are endeavors to prove taqlid in an indirect way. The ahadith, rather the set of ahadith that we are going to discuss today, are those ahadith which prohibit issuing a fatwa that's not based on ilm. So we have a number of ahadith which prohibit and discourage and which forbid issuing fatwa that is not based on ilm. Now, how do mujtahideen try to prove taqlid from these ahadith which do not speak of taqlid? Their argument goes as follows. These ahadith clearly forbid issuing fatwa that's not based on ilm. Therefore, issuing fatwa that's based on ilm is valid and permissible. Furthermore, it follows, and the second step, rather third step, that if issuing fatwa based on knowledge, based on ilm, is permissible, accepting such fatwa would also be acceptable and legitimate, and that is taqlid. Let's have a look at how the mujtahideen outline this discussion, outline this argument, and then I'm going to respond. This is the book of Misbah al-Usul by Ayatollah Khou'i, the famed mujtahid who passed away a couple of decades ago. And this book, Misbah al-Usul, page number 538, Al-Kalamu fi Taqlid, discussion with regard to taqlid. He goes on in the next page. On his discussions of riwayat, this hadith in page number 539, he goes as follows. منها الروايات الناهية عن الإفتاء بغير العلم. We have a number of ahadith, these traditions, these sayings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam, they forbid giving fatwa that's not based on ilm. Therefore, giving fatwa based on ilm, based on knowledge, is permissible. And if that is permissible, acting per those fatwa should be acceptable as well. And that is what we call taqlid. What is the problem with these hadith? With this discussion? Let me show you first the hadith that they base their discussion on. Which ahadith they are referring to. This is the book of Al-Kafi lil-Kulayni, written by Kulayni rahimahullah, volume number 1, published by Dar al-Kutub al-Islamiyya in Tehran, page number 42, باب النهي عن القول بغير علم. Prohibition of qawl. Qawl doesn't mean just speaking. Qawl doesn't just mean stating something. Qawl also means belief. So, stating or believing something that is not based on ilm, that has been prohibited. And what does ilm mean? Does ilm simply mean knowledge? Or ilm mean something else? Inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, that is very critical, and we are going to discuss that in this lecture as well. Let's have a look at this hadith here. Al-Mufaddal ibn Yazid narrates from Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu was-salam, أنهاك عن خصلتين فيهما هلاك الرجال. There are two characteristics, there are two sets of actions that cause people to be destroyed in religion, that cause people to be misguided and thus be worthy of fire of hell. And I prohibit you from these two actions, from these two character traits, from these two attributes. And what are they? أنهاك أن تدين الله بالباطل. I prohibit you and I forbid you to obey God through something that is void, something that's incorrect. So you can never obey Allah. You can never worship Allah through an action that's unjust, an action that is wrong, an action that is a heresy, an action that's blasphemy. So the first characteristic, the first attribute that you have to avoid is that you worship or try to gain pleasure of the Creator through an action that is not permissible in Islam, that an action that is wrong. So that is number one. Number two, وَتُفْتِ النَّاسَ بِمَا لَا تَعْلَمْ. Characteristic number two that I forbid you from is that تُفْتِ النَّاسَ بِمَا لَا تَعْلَمْ. Give fatwa that you do not know. Give a fatwa of something that you're not aware of. That would be the literal translation. Literal translation. And inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, I'll have an explanation for this hadith that would clarify what does it mean. So this hadith here says that you do not give fatwa of something that you do not know. So you should give fatwa of something do you know. So it follows that if it's okay in Islam, if it's okay with the holy Imams alayhim assalam to issue fatwa about things that a person is knowledgeable about, therefore accepting such fatwa, which is taqlid, is also permissible. And this is how the argument of Al-Khu'i and the rest goes. Let's have a look at this hadith. Al-Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says in this hadith, Man afta an-nasa bighayri ilmin. Man afta an-nasa bighayri ilmin. Any such person who issues fatwa to people without knowledge. Now I'm translating this hadith as mujtahideen would be translating. So whoever issues a fatwa to people without knowledge, what's the problem with that? Wala hudan, and without any guidance, la'anathu malaikatur rahmah. Such a person is condemned by la'na, is condemned by damnation of the angels of mercy. Even angels of mercy, they do what? They condemn such a person with damnation. وَمَلَائِكَةُ الْعَذَابِ, and the angels of chastisement, and angels of torment, they also damn this person. They also issue damnation for such a person. وَلَحِقَهُ وِزْرُ مَنْ عَمِلَ بِفَتْيَةٍ. And such a person, لَحِقَهُ, the sin of the person who followed his fatwa, the torment that would be worthy of the person who followed his fatwa would reach him. So the sin of the person who followed his fatwa, and his fatwa was without knowledge, would reach him. So you see, these ahadith, they forbid issuing fatwa without knowledge. They say that it's haram, it's forbidden, it's prohibited to issue fatwa without knowledge. Now, that's all these ahadith say. They do not talk about taqlid. However, we can deduce and we can infer the legitimacy of taqlid from these ahadith in the following manner. If issuing fatwa without knowledge is prohibited, issuing fatwa with knowledge, according to knowledge, should be permissible. And if issuing fatwa according to knowledge is permissible, accepting such fatwa should also be permissible, and that is taqlid. And thus, these ahadith in an indirect manner do imply the legitimacy and validity of taqlid. Now having outlined the argument of the mujtahideen, what is my position with regard to this argument? Do these ahadith, these traditions, prove taqlid? And is the argument of mujtahideen sound and acceptable in this field, in this area? My position is, and inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, I will substantiate it pretty soon, that this argument by mujtahideen is ludicrous, is very, very weak. Not only very weak, it's evidently wrong, because they have this misunderstanding about fatwa. If you did not listen to my previous lecture, please go back and listen to the lecture. And I extensively spoke about fatwa and ahadith fatwa in the Noble Quran. It is the presumption of mujtahideen, wrong presumption, wrong presupposition of the jurists, that they think whenever there is the term fatwa, it means what we mean today by the term fatwa, how we define it today by the term fatwa. Today, for instance, the word computer means a specific device. But if you went 200 years before, when there were no computers invented, the word computing or computer, if you had mentioned in a newspaper or in a speech, nobody would understand that you are referring to a Mac or to a PC, right? Words change and their meanings change with time. Fatwa in the parlance of ahadith, fatwa at the times of the holy imams alayhimussalam, simply meant to explain something, simply meant to reply to someone's query, simply meant to make something more understandable for another person, to elucidate and to explain and to simplify and to deliver to another person. So these hadith, they're not talking about just the technical fatwa, which is the statement of a jurist that is the conclusion of his ijtihadi and juristic calculations. They do not refer to that. So man after, whoever explains something to someone بغير علم, without ilm in this place, and the usage of the holy imams alayhim salatu wassalam, and the sayings of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam commonly refers to what? Refers to hadith. It's very important to remember that at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, there was no jurisprudence. There was no ilm al-fiqh. At the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, there was no set ilm of history amongst Muslims, or ilm, the discipline of tafsir, or the discipline of akhlaq. None of them existed at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And likewise, in the coming eras and coming generations, at the times of the holy imams alayhim salatu wasalam, when ilm was spoken of, knowledge was spoken of, it meant hadith. It meant the sayings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the holy imams alayhim salam. So In short, this hadith, من أفتى بغير علم لعنته ملائكة الرحمة وملائكة العذاب. Whosoever gives fatwa without knowledge, that would be a literal translation, and that would be a misleading translation. The term fatwa here does not mean the technical fatwa that we understand from this term today. And ilm is just not any ilm. So you could say ijtihad is an ilm, jurisprudence is an ilm, fiqh is an ilm. Therefore, if a person issues a fatwa based on ijtihad, based on jurisprudence, based on the discipline of fiqh, his fatwa has legitimacy. This hadith is not talking about that. This hadith was issued, was transmitted, was spoken at a time when there was term fatwa meant something else, referred to something else, referred to simple explanation, simply explanation, statement, saying something, replying to someone. And ilm meant hadith. So, the proper understanding and proper translation and proper interpretation of this hadith would be as follows. من أفتى بغير علم لعنته ملائكة الرحمة. A person who explains something to another person without hadith, without that matter being present in the hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, such an explanation is an act that is condemned by damnation by angels of mercy and angels of chastisement. So that would be the correct interpretation of hadith. Now, with regard to fatwa, that fatwa means explanation. Fatwa means delivery of a matter to someone who doesn't know. We spoke about that in the previous lecture, and I don't have to, and I should not repeat that. However, ilm, that is very important, because ilm, which is commonly translated as knowledge in the ahadith, is a term that is commonly used in different ahadith and commonly mentioned in various ahadith. What does it refer to? What does it mean? If you go to books of definition, books that encyclopedic books that have been written by classical Islamic writers, you would find many definitions for the term ilm, because like other terms, the term ilm has gone through different usages and has seen various usages. So in different eras, but usages by different people and different areas of understanding and different areas of knowledge and different branches of study, ilm has been used in different senses and different meanings. In what sense or what senses did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the holy Imams alayhim salam use the term ilm? Let me read to you some ahadith from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, from the holy Imams alayhim salam, and these ahadith would give good context and provide very clear clues for us to understand what the holy Imams alayhim salatu wasalam meant by the term ilm. This is Al-Usulu min al-Kafi, the Usul of Kafi, volume number 1, published by Dar al-Kutub al-Islamiyya in Tehran. Let's go to page number 30, Kitabu Fadl al-Ilm, the book of the virtues of ilm. Virtues of ilm. So, does ilm mean knowledge? Literally, yes. It means knowledge. It means to recognize something, to be cognizant of something, to understand something. That literally it means. However, it meant a specific thing at the times of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It just didn't mean just anything. And if you were in the audience in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you would have a specific understanding. You would have a specific sense of this usage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with regard to this very important term, which is the term ilm. Let's have a look at this hadith. First hadith narrated on the authority of Al-Quran al-Natiq Bahr al-Haqa'iq, Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, from his forefather, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ. Seeking ilm is a duty, is an obligation for every Muslim. Seeking knowledge, I translate it as knowledge, that's literal translation, is an obligation for every Muslim. Allah inna Allah, beware, Allah, beware. Inna Allah, verily, God, the Almighty, yuhibbu, He loves, God the Almighty loves, bughat al-ilm, bughat al-ilm, bughat al-ilm, seekers of ilm. Verily, Allah loves, Allah appreciates, Allah reveres seekers of ilm. So what does He mean by ilm? When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam spoke these words, we do not know. Was it in a limited session, or was it a speech, or was it when He was walking somewhere? We do not know the context. But when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam spoke these words in the Arabia, there were no various branches of knowledge. There was no place where you could go and find a library or find a college or find a school where you could study mathematics, where you could study history, where you could study literature, where you could study theology, where you could study chemistry, or where you could study physics. There was nothing. I shouldn't say Saudi. The Arabian Peninsula was a very backwards place and a very isolated place. And those people who heard this from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, most of them were illiterate. And none of them felt this obligation that now they have to migrate, they have to travel to Egypt or to Greece in order, or to Rome in order to learn, to enter their schools and learn mathematics or astronomy or astrology or philosophy or any of those sciences. However, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told them it's obligatory upon every Muslim to seek ilm. So what did he mean? At that time of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ilm had only one instance. Knowledge had only one way to be procured. And that was the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and after him the hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim assalam. So when he said that you have to learn, it's an obligation, that you have to seek knowledge, if you were a member of that audience, you would clearly understand that he means that you have to gain a good understanding of tafsir of Quran, interpretation of the verse of Quran. You have to be aware of the history of the apostles and prophets before our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You have to learn what are the attributes of the Almighty Creator of the heavens and the earth. You have to learn what are the different conditions of the angels of Allah. You have to learn and you have to understand what is going to happen to you after death, what journeys await you after your demise, and how is it going to be on the day of judgment. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is commanding you to know what is obligatory, what as a Muslim, what's expected of you to perform and what's expected of you to avoid in your life, and what are the good manners that you have to uphold. What are the rights of your parents over you? What are the rights of your neighbors over you? What are the rights of your family members that you have to uphold and that you have to respect? So all these things, talabul ilmi farida, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was commanding them that you have to gain knowledge of these things. And this had only one way to be procured, one way to be attained, and one way to be secured, and that was through the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There were no libraries. There was no set discipline of tafsir. If you wanted to study tafsir, learn tafsir, exegesis of the Noble Quran, you had to learn the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his statements that pertained to the exegesis of the Noble Quran. If you wanted to know the rulings of Islam, there was no discipline of jurisprudence that was established, that was defined. No, you had to learn the hadith the statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which were oral most of the time, and only some people had written limited amount of hadith. And later ages, they were all lost. You had to learn these sayings of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you wanted to know what are the attributes of Allah, you had to listen to the sermons of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam that address the topic of the attributes of Allah Ta'ala. If you wanted to learn about the hereafter, or any of those things that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to know, there was only one way to learn. That was the hadith. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he says talabul ilmi faridha ala kulli muslimin, if you were a member of that audience, what would be your understanding of that statement of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You would understand from this, talabul ilmi faridha, seeking knowledge. He's not just talking about any knowledge. He's not talking about just any knowledge that's obligatory. He is talking about his own words, that you should seek and learn and comprehend my words, and then safeguard them, and then deliver them to other people. He is talking about this, and this is his own hadith, talabul ilm. He is commanding people to learn his ahadith. Because ilm didn't have any other personification, any embodiment at the time of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It had only one example, one embodiment, and that was the hadith. Let's have a look at the second hadith in this chapter. Talabul ilmi farida, that's very similar to the hadith we just discussed. This narration is from Imam Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, the first Imam, salamullahi alayhi. He says, Ayyuhan nas, O people, beware, understand this. A'lamu, understand and comprehend. Anna kamal ad-dini talabul ilmi wal amalu bih. That the perfection of one's religion, the perfection of one's faith is talabul ilm, is seeking ilm, and then acting according to that ilm. So if you want your religion to be complete, to be perfected, it has one way, and that is seeking ilm and then acting according to that ilm. Of course, at that time, there was no other way of any knowledge. There were no disciplines. There were no different branches of knowledge. There was only hadith. So when they were talking about ilm, they meant hadith. It was coterminous with commanding people to seek hadith, because if they want to learn the interpretation of Quran, the halal and haram, anything, akhlaq, anything, it was only encompassed in hadith. And even today, if all of these things have one true, where they're all embodied, and that is hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam. ألا وإن طلب العلم أوجب عليكم من طلب المال. Seeking ilm is more necessary for you than seeking worldly possessions. إن المال, worldly properties, worldly possessions, مقسوم مذموم لكم, has been, you have been destined. You have been destined by Allah the Creator, that which possessions that you will have in life. And madhmunun lakum, and you have been, Allah has promised that, and Allah has guaranteed that your sustenance from Allah has already been assigned to you, and has already been promised to you and guaranteed to you. قد قسمه عادل بينكم. That person, that Creator who is just, He has distributed, and He has assigned you. He is just, He is fair, and He has assigned you your share of your sustenance in this life. وَضَمِنَهُ وَسَيَفِي لَكُمْ, and He has guaranteed your sustenance, that you will get your sustenance, and He will be faithful to His promise and faithful to His guarantee. وَالْعِلْمُ مَخْزُونٌ عِنْدَ أَهْلِهِ. However, ilm, the knowledge of Islam is makhzoon, is treasured amongst those who are the treasures of Allah. Who are the treasures of Allah? Whom Allah has made His treasures of knowledge? The holy Imams alayhim as-salam. Who are the sources of guidance? the holy Imams alayhim salam. Allah has entrusted them as treasurers of Allah's knowledge. So this ilm, this guidance from Allah, if you want tafsir, if you want akhlaq, if you want halal and haram, if you want to know the attributes of Allah, if you want to know how Allah created, what's the story of creation, what were the stories of the apostles and people before us, and what is going to happen until the day of judgment, and what's going to happen in the hereafter, all of that knowledge is treasured with those who are the treasures of Allah and safeguards of Allah and guardians of Allah over Allah's knowledge. وَقَدْ أُمِرْتُمْ بِطَلَبِهِ مِنْ أَهْلِهِ فَاطْلُبُوهُ. Therefore, Allah Ta'ala has commanded you to seek that knowledge, that understanding from those treasurers. And the knowledge that you seek from the treasurers of Allah's knowledge, from the guardians of Allah's knowledge, is only hadith. You understand that, right? That Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam here is commanding you to seek hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So all of knowledge, religious knowledge and religious guidance is with Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, and you are commanded to seek that knowledge from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And the knowledge that's going to be transmitted from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, whether it pertains to tafsir, whether it pertains to halal and haram, whether it pertains to akhlaq, whether it pertains to the attributes of Allah, whether it pertains to history, whether it pertains to creation and astrology, it's all going to be in the form of hadith, So he is talking about hadith. Talabul ilm, faridha, seeking knowledge is obligatory. It means hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So let's go back to the ahadith that are talking about issuing fatwa without knowledge. Man afta bighayri ilmin. Khu'i, and like Khu'i, many other mujtahids, they have argued for the validity of taqlid. In which way? But through these sets of ahadith, which are very similar to one another. It's prohibited to give fatwa without knowledge. So if it's prohibited to give fatwa without knowledge, it's allowed to give fatwa with knowledge. And we as mujtahids, we give fatwa with knowledge. Therefore, if our action is legitimate, then it should also be acceptable and legitimate for people to follow our fatwa. And that is taqlid. This is a very, very specious argument. Why? Because first of all, fatwa here doesn't mean issuing fatwa like mujtahids issue fatwa. Fatwa here means just to explain. Man afta bighayri ilmin means when you deliver something in religion to another person, when you explain something, when you answer another person, that is issuing fatwa. That was fatwa means here. And then without knowledge means without hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. When you state something in religion to another person without hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, then Allah condemns you. Allah, the angels of mercy and angels of torment, all of them, they damn you. They do your lan. So therefore, whatever you have to explain in Islam, it has to be according to hadith, it has to be with hadith, it has to be per hadith. And it never says these hadith, never says that the juristic opinion of a jurist, that is hujjah for common Muslims. It absolutely has nothing to do with taqlid, and absolutely has nothing to do with the institution of marji'iyya and the obligation to follow them. I hope this is clear to you, and I hope you understand this. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. May Allah bless you all, and Allah keep you well. If you go to my previous speeches, you will find many statements from mujtahideen that there was no science of ijtihad, there was no science of fiqh at the times of the holy Imams alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Everything was delivered to people by teaching people hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Therefore, everything was taught to people by delivering hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Therefore, when these ahadith are saying that you should not explain something without ilm, it means you should not explain something that is not present in hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Everything you should explain to people, you deliver to people, should be what is in hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam. And this was commonly done by narrating hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam to people. This hadith, or these sets of ahadith, do not state that a person, when he is giving us his own juristic opinion, that is hujjah for us. Because they're not talking about the fatwa of mujtahideen as we understand it. Fatwa today from this term fatwa. I hope this is clear to you. May Allah bless you all. Allah keep you well. Let me see. This is sufficient for this lecture. Let me see if you have any questions. Shaykh say, let's Takfiris attack the shrine of Imam Hussein alayhi salam Sistani issues of fatwa to fight those who attack. Surely this isn't a bad judgment. No, this is true. Any statement that is in accordance and in conformity to the statements of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam, that is true and that is correct. We are not going to falsify that, and we are not going to oppose that. You understand? Any statement that's made, for instance, it is obligatory. We know we have to defend Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. We have to defend. That's an obligation. To defend the holy places of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. That is, we know that is the holy Imams alayhim as-salatu was-salam have given us that obligation. Therefore, if someone attacks that, that is a fact that we have to do. Now, Sistani says this is true. Sistani says we have to do this. Now, we are not going to oppose Sistani. For instance, Allah says in Quran, it's obligatory for you to pray. Sistani says it's obligatory to pray. We are not going to oppose Sistani because he said it's obligatory to pray. Praying is obligatory. If any person, even a non-Muslim, even an atheist, even a porn star, if he says something that is true, that is true, we are not going to oppose that just because of a person is saying. However, we have to understand that statement is true not because this person is saying, but because this is the position of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. So if Sistani says it's obligatory to defend the shrine of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, that is a correct statement. However, it's correct because that is the position of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, not because it's the opinion of Sistani. You understand the difference? If Sistani said something, he expressed a view, and we do not know. Sistani said something, for instance, or any other mujtahid said something that we clearly do not know it's true or not. Then we cannot say it's true. We just have to say we don't know. If we can say only it's true if it is in accord, if it's consistent with the position of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. If someone does taqlid, is he Shia? Yeah, he's Shia. Of course he's Shia. Please dedicate a taqlid to show the arguments of contemporary alive scholars and refuting them. It makes them debate you. For example, he has recently been trying to prove taqlid. Well, I don't know what he has said. And I bring his discussions from people who are much more important than the person that you mentioned. So, okay, that would mean we'd need to. Okay. Let me see if there's anyone in Zoom. Okay. You can always attend my discussion in Zoom, and in Zoom we can interact and you could participate with audio. And video as well, and you could pose your questions. May Allah bless you all. And then Zoom webinars, what you have to do usually, you have to type that you want to talk, and then I can unmute you. And when I unmute you, then you can discuss, and then we can have a chat, and we can discuss. I could hear your voice, and the rest of the people on Facebook and YouTube, they will hear your voice. So I encourage you, for those of you who want to engage in discussion with me, those of you who want to pose live questions to me, you are most welcome always to come to Zoom. And inshallah, tabaraka wa ta'ala, we can have a lively discussion, and we have an argument perhaps. We can have an even debate on Zoom. May Allah bless you all. I thank you very much, all of you, that you listen to this speech. May Allah bless you all. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma kun li waliyaka al-hujjat ibn al-Hasan salawatuka alayhi wa ala aba'ih fi hadhihi as-sa'a wa fi kulli sa'a waliyan wa hafidha wa qa'idan wa nasira wa dalilan wa 'ayna hatta tuskinahu ardaka taw'a wa tumatta'ahu fiha tawila. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ali Baba, you want to say something?
No, I was just saying hi, man. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum assalam. That's all?
No, I'm not going to bother you, man. Always just
okay. All right. Thank you very much. May Allah bless you and keep you well. Stay healthy.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay, everyone. May Allah bless you all, and Allah.
Do you have one tomorrow as well?
Probably I'll announce.
All right, I'll see you there, Ross.
If not tomorrow, day after tomorrow for sure, okay?
Definitely, 100%.
Inshallah.
Jazakallah.
Yalla, ma'as salam. Jazakallah. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه.